TPol was to Enterprise what 7 of 9 was to Voyager. She was brought in to appeal to audiences who were fans of tight catsuits and slender women. However, the production team did make an extremely savvy decision that frankly saved the character. They cast Jolene Blalock in the role. Much can and will be said about the various decisions that were made surrounding TPol's arc on the show, and the repeated attempts to get more and more skin shown, but Blalock managed to deliver a performance that allowed the female Vulcan to stand the test of time. Now, 20 years after the show premiered, there were calls for TPol to make appearances on Strange New Worlds. It was far from easy sailing for her. TPol dealt with stigma and addiction storylines, along with a very up-and-down relationship with Trip. She was given the unenviable task of trying to boost the ratings as they slipped, which fell on the shoulders of Blalock in the costume department. So, why is it that she's so loved? What did she do that made her stand out so much? Well, I'm Bree from Trek Culture, and hopefully we can answer that question as we look at 10 things that you didn't know about TPol. Number 10. TPol versus TPOW. TPOW first appeared in the original series episode Amok Time. She was revered enough to make a personal request of Starfleet, allowing the Enterprise to stay in orbit of Vulcan while Spock underwent Pon farr, and to have it granted. 100 years prior to this, she was slated to be the longest-serving Vulcan on a Starfleet vessel, and she was to be played by Jolene Blalock. TPOW was actually originally supposed to be the officer serving aboard the Enterprise. This would lead to her understanding of humans, which would in turn lead to her becoming such an important voice on the Federation political circuit. However, this never happened as there were concerns over the licensing rights of the character, who had been created by Theodore Sturgeon when he was writing Amok Time. In a situation similar to the Tom Paris-Nick Locarno switch that occurred in The Next Generation and Voyager, the character was remodeled so that the Enterprise wouldn't have to pay royalties for the use of TPOW in every episode that she appeared in. The character would, however, go on to actually appear in the show's 4th season, played by Kara Zediker. Number 9. It's Gorillas in the Mist Time. During the initial sketches, Brandon Braga suggested that one of the inspirations for TPol was the American primatologist and conservationist Dian Fossey. Fossey was the subject of the 1988 film Gorillas in the Mist, starring Sigourney Weaver. Fossey and TPol were similar in that they were pioneers, in their own way, in zoological studies. While TPol was studying humans in their shipboard habitats, Fossey was of course famous for studying and living with gorillas in the Rwandan forests. They also shared another similarity. Both could be steadfast, stubborn, and potentially deeply frustrating to those around them. TPol would go through a large amount of trauma throughout Enterprise's 4-year run. And of course, Fossey faced daily opposition for her work to protect the gorillas from poaching and tourist routes. Fossey's story ends in tragedy. In 1985, her body was found in her cabin in Rwanda, having been bludgeoned to death, and her assistant was convicted of her murder in absentia. The character Bible for TPol took inspiration from Fossey's fearless and dogged determination, though other elements would be softened to make the character more attractive to new viewers. Number 8. She became the face of AIDS-related stigma in Star Trek. Stigma is the 2nd season episode that saw TPol dealing with the prejudice in Vulcan society towards those affected with Panar syndrome. Panar was analogous to HIV and AIDS. This was deliberate as the episode was produced as part of Paramount's HIV awareness program in 2003. TPol contracts the condition via a forced mind meld. At this point in Star Trek's history, mind melds were deemed an inappropriate and taboo practice amongst Vulcans. This leads directly to TPol's ostracization by her Vulcan colleagues. The episode was a subtle reuse of themes explored in the unproduced Blood and Fire, a script written by David Gerrold which was rejected early in the Next Generation's run. Critics of the episode said that it didn't go far enough in exploring the prejudice TPol faces. As she contracts Panar through no fault of her own, the episode ran the risk of judging those who acquired HIV through consensual sexual acts. Despite this, Blalock gives one of her strongest performances to that point in the show as she deals with the fallout of her diagnosis and discovery. Regardless of whether the episode did or didn't go far enough in its message, it was an example of the franchise moving forward in how it shined a light on modern issues. Blood and Fire had been rejected for much the same reason that TPol was facing public exile. The simple fact of producing this episode showed Star Trek was in fact growing up. Number 7. It's a wig. Alright, you might have known this one, but Jolene Blalock actually had blonde curly hair while filming Enterprise. Hair designer Michael Moore was adamant that TPol, however, would have dark hair, so he decided that she would be given a wig. Stylist Gloria Casney was tasked with getting Blalock into the hairpiece every day. This process would take about 30 minutes while Blalock's hair was wound and tucked into the cap. The first wig they tried actually had a longer look reminiscent of a mullet. Thankfully though, the mullet was cropped shorter. The look going into season 1 was close to what had previously been seen on Vulcans, though TPol's fringe was a little more uneven than Spock or Sarek's had been. The 3rd and 4th seasons had her hair begin to be a little more human, as Moore believed that living around these people would soften TPol and allow her rigid discipline to slide a little. The 4th season saw her receive gentle highlights in her wig, while the strict, almost poker straight hair from the first couple of years was retired. When it came to In a Mirror Darkly, they decided to give her a long wig to create an even bigger difference between her mirror and prime counterparts. Number 6, the ratings dropped, and so did her neckline. As the show entered its 3rd season, TPol's character underwent a number of changes. Firstly, she left the Vulcan High Command. This led to her receiving a field commission of commander in Starfleet by the 4th season. One would assume then that she would be issued a Starfleet uniform like the rest of her crew. Again, one would assume. But costume designer Robert Blackman was quite honest when describing the reason for TPol's costumes. He said it was simply to boost ratings. As the show's 2nd season wore on, the views began to dip, so the show began to plot out the Xindi arc. Which, say what you will, I like the Xindi arc. Along the way, TPol's darker catsuit was abandoned for a bright-colored variant with a plunging neckline. Though obvious, the costume designers continued to provide her with outfits like this for the rest of the show's run, even when she entered Starfleet. Rather than a Starfleet uniform, she was given another low-cut jumpsuit with rank insignia. While the ploy may have contributed to the show receiving a 4th season, it wasn't enough to save it from cancellation at the end of the year. Number 5. She was the hardest character to cast on Enterprise. The character that would become TPol was the last one to be cast. According to Brannon Braga, hundreds of actresses were tested for the part, with none of them winning over the other. The character Bible described her as alluring, yet confident and capable. For a time, when she was meant to be TPol, elements of Celia Levsky's performance were sought. As the character changed between Bible and audition though, the producers weren't entirely sure what exactly they were looking for. Jolene Blalock was in the very last group to come in and read for the part. It was, apparently, a slam dunk. She had in fact turned down the audition 3 times already. Blalock had been a fan of the original series and Spock in particular as a child, though she had no interest in any of the spin-offs. It was only after her agent convinced her to read the script for Broken Bow that she agreed to read for the part. Once she came in, things moved very quickly, and before long she was undergoing the 2-hour makeup session to transform her into a Vulcan. Number 4. It's a Trillium down for this storyline. The 3rd season of Enterprise saw TPol exposed to a compound that was known as Trillium D. This compound was highly addictive and damaging. Its first appearance came in Impulse, which is effectively the zombie Vulcan episode, a genuinely unnerving story about the Vulcan science ship Saleya. TPol's addiction to this substance, using it to expand her understanding of emotions, was a controversial one. Brannon Braga later said he understood the storyline would be controversial as it would show TPol knowingly continuing to abuse the substance to further her own understanding of emotions. As this storyline had notably never been attempted with any of the male Vulcans in the franchise, it left the door open to criticism as to why exactly the writers were going down this route with her, though they would later defend the storyline, with it remaining highly controversial to this day. Number 3. She's half Romulan. Had Enterprise been approved for a 5th season, there was a major shock coming for the audiences in terms of TPol's parentage, specifically her father. Though he had been mentioned in the show, there was little revealed about him on screen. The 5th season would have revealed him to be a Romulan spy operating on Vulcan. This was actually a reuse of the original plan for Lieutenant Saavik, who first appeared in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. She was immediately a more emotional Vulcan than the franchise had previously offered. This was due, though not stated on screen, to the fact that she was half Romulan. When The Search for Spock was released, with a now recast Saavik returning, played this time by Robin Curtis, the plot element had been completely swept away, with Curtis's performance matching the stereotypical Vulcan portrayals. The return of the idea for use with TPol would have posed an interesting challenge for the writers. At this point in Star Trek's history, no human had seen a Romulan and lived to tell the tale. In Balance of Terror, Spock was unaware that Romulans were related to Vulcans. So how are they going to explain TPol's parentage while keeping canon intact? Alas, with Season 5 a pipe dream, it seems like this question will just never be answered. Number 2. Femme Nikita inspired an episode that reveals her backstory. The episode The Seventh sees TPol assigned the task of hunting Manos, a former Vulcan reconnaissance agent who went rogue. This is actually a mission she had begun in the years prior to serving aboard the Enterprise, when she was still part of the Vulcan Ministry of Security. It is revealed she would be assigned missions to bring fugitives to justice, a story inspired by Luc Besson's film. Femme Nikita sees a young homeless junkie named Nikita caught up in a murder. She's imprisoned and then blackmailed into working with a shadowy agency as a contract killer. Though she's skilled at her work, it quickly interferes with her hopes for a personal life, leading to some very difficult decisions. While the two stories are not identical, the themes of the job one can't turn down being the thing to threaten their established lives and identity is. There is a further detail in that while Nikita deals with the trauma of her former life, TPol actively sought to run from it. She underwent Falara, a ritual designed to purge the memory of killing, which leads to a shocking revelation as the episode goes on. Nikita's story ends with her escaping from her work with the agency, while TPol's ends with a resolution to her former life. Number 1. Jolene Blalock was critical about how the character was written. As stated before, Jolene Blalock was a big fan of the original series and Spock in particular when she agreed to take on the role of TPol. She saw from early on that writers for Enterprise wanted to take her character in a different direction than Vulcans who had come before, and she wasn't thrilled about that decision. She famously said, "You can't substitute tits and ass for a good story," when it came to describing her various costumes. However, she also struggled with the general levels of emotion that she was expected to deliver. She saw this as veering away from how Vulcans were supposed to act. She also acknowledged that she thought a relationship between TPol and Trip wouldn't work, both for her own Vulcan self and for Trip's frequent emotional outbursts. Finally, she believed TPol was better than some of the directions that she had been taken. She had been given a fatal disease which went largely unaddressed. She became an addict and had been, in Blalock's words, shown as a weak woman. TPol, Blalock believed, was more than any of these, even if the writing wasn't up to the standards for that character. While it's up to audiences to decide if they agree with Blalock's assessment or not, which I personally do, I love the character, TPol remains a superb name on the actor's resume, one we all very much hope to see reprised in the future. And those were 10 things that you, hopefully, didn't already know about TPol. If you like what we do here at Trek Culture, you could hit that subscribe button. We're almost at 250,000. You could also follow us on Twitter at Trek Culture, or you could find me on Twitter at TrekkieBree. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next time. Live long and prosper.